Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Tonight, I have the honor and privilege of being joined by my Sheikh and Murshid, Sheikh Wahid Azal of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, who returns with us for part 18 in the series of dialogues and conversations that we are doing. And tonight, for part 18, we have the honor of talking about the fatwa that the Nur Fatimiyya Sufi order has issued against what we are seeing in Iran and the theocracy in Iran, which has suppressed the divine feminine. So it is my honor and my privilege to have our dear Sheikh, Murshid, friend, and brother here to discuss what has been going on and the Nur Fatimiyya Sufi order's stance against those mullahs in Iran.
به نام خداوند جان و خرد. In the name of God the just. I have issued a fatwa against the regime in Iran as of Saturday 24th of September. I will read the text of the fatwa in its original Farsi and then my English translation of it. And then I wish to address the brothers and sisters in Iran of the Sufi tariqas in Persian, because I know that this video will most probably reach them. So a significant part after I read these texts is going to be in Farsi. Those who don't know the language, I apologize. But one of the purposes of this podcast is to reach out to people that we know in Iran, because this is the real thing. And then we'll cover some other events. So let me read the text of the fatwa. Bismillah al-Aqhar al-Aftah. Allah la ilaha illa huwa al-Aqhar al-Aftah. از جهتی که حکومت ظالم جمهوری اسلامی ایران حکومت مردمی نیست و رژیمی غاضب و خونخواری می باشد که در طول زمان لامشروعیت خود را بر کل ثابت کرده است، این فتوایی باشد و سفارشی بر هر شخص خداپرستی در مقاومت و مبارزه اتم با این حکومت، چون از کبار تا صغار مفسد فی الارض می باشد. پس این باشد اعلامیه قیام و جهاد بر علیه جمهوری اسلامی تا پیروزی حاصل شود و غلبه رژیم اهریمنی به دست مردم شریف ایران تحقق یابد و زنان ایران علل خصوص از منفوریت حکومت مردسالار برای ابدالده آزاد شوند. این است حکم الهی. چه بسا ایام خجسته برای کلیه سکان ایران شهر نزدیک باشد و یا نور. وحید ازل در 20 ماه حق در سال 17 نورانی. And the English translation. Fatwa against the Islamic Republic. In the name of God, the most vengeful, the supreme victor. God, no other God is there besides it, the most vengeful, the supreme victor. Inasmuch as the tyrannical system of the Islamic Republic of Iran is not a people's government, and is an irate, bloodthirsty regime, which during the passage of time has proven its illegitimacy to all, this is a fatwa and an instruction to every God-worshipping individual to resist and struggle completely against this unjust system, because whether high or low, they, the IRI, are corruptors of the earth. So let this be an announcement to insurrection and a sacred struggle, a jihad against the Islamic Republic until victory ensues and the overcoming of this Ahrimanic satanic regime by the hands of the noble Iranian people is realized. And the women of Iran especially are forever freed from this loathsome system of patriarchy. This is the divine decree. Perhaps the auspicious days are near at hand for all the inhabitants of Iran and old light. Signed Wahid Azal, the 20th of the month of truth in the 17th luminous year, which is Saturday, the 24th of September, 2022 Common Era. And now let me address my fellow sisters and brothers in Iran. به نام خدا، ای مردم شریف ایران و علل خصوص برادران و خواهران طریقت ایران، این اعلامیه خیزش بر شما می باشد. برخیزید و به مردم شریف ایران، به فرزندان ایرانی در خیابانهای ایران کمک کنید. حامی این مردم باشید برای سرنگونی و برانداختن این رژیم اهریمنی شیطانی ولایت فقیه. این جنبش و این انقلاب مردمی برای آزادی شما می باشد. علل خصوص به برادران و خواهران سلسله طریقت قادری کردستان، شما به برادران و خواهران خودتان هم در کردستان و هم غیر از کردستان کمک کنید، حامی این مردم باشین برای سرنگونی این رژیم ولایت فقیه. برادران و خواهران سلسله خاکسار در سراسر ایران، به مردم ایران، به فرزندان ایران کمک کنید، حامی اینها باشید در خیابانها. برادران و خواهران سلسله ذهبیه شیراز و غیره، بریزید در خیابانها و کمک و حامی مردم خود باشید. روزهای آزادی در دست است. زنده باد مردم ایران، زن، زندگی و آزادی. This was a message to several of the Sufi orders in Iran, beginning with the Qadri Sufi order of Kurdistan, the sisters and brothers of that order, to aid and help their brothers and sisters on the streets of Iran against this regime of the guardianship of the jurisprudence. Also to the brothers and sisters of the Khafsar Silsila, and the brothers and sisters of the Silsila or the Tariqa of the Zahabiyah, which are based in Shiraz, to come to the aid of their brothers and sisters. This call also goes out to all the various sub-branches of the Nimatullahi order, and all Sufis and all dervishes of whatever branches and whatever sub-branches and whatever silsilas that exist in Iran, to come out and help their brothers and sisters. This is a holy struggle. The holy struggle is a holy struggle for freedom of the Iranian people from the clutches of a fascist, deceitful, and in my opinion, a foreign imposed regime on the Iranian people since 1979. Despite perceptions that the revolution of 1979 was a revolution represented by the figure of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the fact of the matter remains that Ayatollah Khomeini and the people around him lied to the Iranian people. When the people of Iran arose in 1979 to overthrow the dictatorship of the Shah, they were promised democracy and freedom. In fact, one of the very prominent chants of that time was Istiqlal, independence, Azadi, freedom, Jumhuriya Islami, the Islamic Republic. At the time, people had no idea what Islamic Republic meant. They had no idea that the Ayatollah Khomeini was basically trying to impose the guardianship of the jurisprudence, the rule by the fuqaha, the jurisconsulates. This was never broached with the people of Iran until later, after the victory of the revolutionaries against the Shah's regime. So there was a process of systematic deceit and lying against the Iranian people. And as more and more evidence has come to light over the last 40 years, it has become very clear to many that what happened in 1979 was in fact a regime change operation imposed by foreign actors, most likely oil companies, and also certain governments like the French government, who basically protected the Ayatollah Khomeini and his people for 6 months. Also, at the time, the Carter administration, who really didn't know what it was doing in the region, and the British, obviously, at the time. And the reason for what happened in Iran is very clear to certain scholars who have been looking at that era, and that was because of the dirty politics of oil and the fact that in the last decade of his reign, despite the fact that the Shah was a dictator, a brutal dictator, and corrupt, the fact is that he began to adopt a lot of the policies of Muhammad Mossadegh in that last decade, especially as far as OPEC is concerned. So he began to push very concertedly for a powerful, independent OPEC bloc, which would have included all of the oil-producing countries in the world. And had that project reached its termination, which would have probably happened if the revolution in Iran had happened sometime in the 1980s, mid-1980s, the history of the world right now would be very different. The power centers of the world would have shifted sometime around that 1980 period, probably to the Middle East. Iran would have been a very prosperous country. There would have not been an 8-year war with Iraq. None of the events that we have witnessed over the last 10, 15 years would have happened. And fundamentally, the most important thing of all is that there would have never been a political Islamism of this kind that we saw with the coming of Khomeini and the Islamic Republic in 1979. And political Islam, since the rise of the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Islamic Revolution of 1979, has proven itself to be a negative force like none other that we have witnessed before. Arguably, all these various Sunni jihadi groups that came out in late 19s and the zeros of this centuries, they all took their initial inspiration from the events that transpired in Iran in 1979 with Ayatollah Khomeini. And we have witnessed that political Islam as a force is fundamentally a fascist force that is even against the interest of Muslims locally on the ground in Muslim countries. Because political Islam seeks to impose by force a completely ideologized Islam. And it does not have any room for difference or pluralism or any kind of view where there are different interpretations or approaches to scripture, to the implementation of the Sharia. It has a very straitjacketed approach to all of these things, and it seeks to eliminate all of its opposition internally within the Muslim world, and obviously then externally outside of the Muslim world. It is aggressive, it is violent, and it is ultimately terrorist. So the importance, the world historical importance of this moment right now, if, and not even if, when the regime in Iran finally collapses, this will be the defeat of Islamism as the political force that it has been since the early 1980s. That means then that the writing on the wall will be for the Taliban, the writing on the wall will be for the Wahhabis in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the writing on the wall will be even for a lot of these Gulf sheikhs. And there it will be a tectonic sea change of a kind, probably as big, if not bigger, than what happened with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Except with the collapse of the Soviet Union, even though it went into a negative direction, the collapse of Islamism will undoubtedly create the space in the region for genuine native democratic forms of governance in that region. That means that totalitarian ideologies such as the Islamists tried to push in the Muslim world will be forever discredited. And so then there will be a concerted effort to create native forms of democratic polity, right? Now, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with liberalism as it is defined in the West, although, there are resemblances. But Dr. Mossadegh, for example, which is probably the most important example that we find in the history of that region, was not a liberal in the Western sense. He was a liberal in a native Iranian sense. And had his project reached its conclusion, the Middle East would be a much different place today. But even with the failure of his project and the coup d'etat of August 1953, many of the events that transpired in the Middle East, for example, the revolution in Egypt, were all inspired by the example of Dr. Mossadegh. So Iran is a trendsetter, as we keep seeing over and over again in the 20th century and even now. So this will be a sea change, and particularly because of the fact that it is the women of Iran that have spearheaded this movement. And it was an Iranian Kurdish woman, an Iranian minority woman, who became the symbol of this insurrection of the Iranian people, this revolution, mahsaamini, God rest her soul. This means that the status of women in that region, beginning with Iran, is about to change. And the Islamists, the political Islamists, the ideology of political Islam, rather than championing a native form of women's rights, instead adopted an extremely obscurantist and reactionary discourse on the status of women. And what that has done is it has stymied all of these societies, right? Contrary to even scriptural, edicts, or contrary to even, a balanced scriptural approach to the issue of women in the Quran itself. Now, some people who read the Quran literally and take the Quran literally would beg to differ. But the fact of the matter is that the issue of women's rights, let me just take this sip here.
Sheikh, that's interesting. And, just to add something, first I would say Nur alaikum, Bismillah. And I would like to say the Shahada of the Fatimiyya Tariqa, which is La ilaha illallah Fatima wajh Allah. There is no God but God, and Fatima is the face of God. And what we're seeing right now in Iran is, from my perspective, is that divine feminine that's basically giving the retribution to these Western-backed forces that have suppressed the people of that region for so long. And it's an honor for us to witness something like this in our lifetimes.
Very much so. In fact, this is what surprisingly, a philosopher like Zizek, who I had no time for until recently, basically came out and he said exactly verbatim what you just said, and he even went even further, saying that what the people of Iran are doing, what the women of Iran are doing, is of such a magnitude that even those of us in the West who have looked at ourselves as being progressive forces can learn a thing or two from what the people of Iran are doing at the moment.
Yeah.
See, this is the importance of this moment, is that there's a tectonic shift happening as democracy is being assaulted in the West, and as democratic institutions throughout the West are under siege by authoritarian and fascist forces everywhere within those societies, whether we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about the United States or Europe or elsewhere, for a grassroots, women-based, women-centered, social democratic movement to arise that seeks ultimately to establish that kind of an order in Iran is huge, right? So it just now basically shifts the pole of the discourse of freedom and the locus of freedom movements throughout the world, once this succeeds, to the Middle East.
Mm.
Something that nobody could have anticipated even a year ago, but it's happening right now at this very moment. And this will succeed. I published an article with Counterpunch last week. We can link this in the description box of the YouTube.
Yeah.
And I said that what has happened here, and you have a lot of spin happening from various sectors saying that this is all regime change, CIA, this, that, the usual canards that we hear from these guys. But this happened spontaneously, and it also happened because it was triggered by the Islamic Republic itself. Had
Yes.
they not accosted this woman, Mahsa Amini, in the Tehran metro on the 13th of this September when she was arrested, um, we wouldn't be here right now. There wouldn't have been this explosion in Iran. They triggered it themselves. It was not the CIA. You have this punditry in Al Manar, this Hezbollah-based news corporation, who are presently very actively spinning these really porous and ridiculous conspiracy theories, claiming that Mahsa Amini was a Komala, or a Kurdish, violent Kurdish separatist operative that was basically on a suicidal mission in Tehran, and this is why it happened, right? Without even explaining how it became that this kamikaze Kurdish separatist happened to be picked up by the moral police. So, they don't address any of these things. They don't address the fact that she was then beaten in by these people, that she collapsed on their watch, that what the independent reports are saying is that she had fractures on her skull. So, if this sort of nonsensical narrative is to be even taken, even entertained, remotely entertained, then these people need to explain that how is it that it was the moral police, it was officials and law enforcement of the Islamic Republic itself that fell into the trap of this young girl, this young 22-year-old who had come with her brother to Tehran to
Mm.
to go to some kind of a wedding, and they were arrested, both of them, brother and sister, in the Tehran metro,
Mm.
and it all unfolded from there. And from the evidence that we have, this woman's hijab was not that bad. She just wore something that had a pattern to it that kind of displeased these so-called moral police, Gashti Ershad, and so they picked her up on her brother, and things obviously escalated with these fascists, and so they took her in, beat her up, and she died on their watch. And these sorts of things are business as usual in Iran, and have been business as usual, especially when you have had these hardliners in power, whether it was under the 8 years of Ahmadinejad, and now for the last year with Raisi in power as the president of Iran. The whole concept of Gashti Ershad, the moral police that you have under the Islamic Republic, by definition is a fascist. It reveals the fascist nature of the Islamic Republic. So all these apologists of the Islamic Republic, whether internally or whether amongst these extremely misled people in the West who are supporting the IRI right now, need to understand a system that has a moral police that wishes to impose a public morality by force as a matter of law by definition defines itself as fascist under any rubric, any definitional rubric of fascist that you want. These people are fascists. So, you know, once this reality is accepted, then it follows very quickly that the nature of the system of the Velayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the Jewish, which represents the basis of the system of Iran, by definition, is a totalitarian dictatorship that will stop at nothing to brutalize and oppress its own people who don't toe its line. And the issue of dress is very fundamental, and the issue of women is fundamental. Now, I have nothing against women, Muslim believing women who wish to wear the hijab by choice. That is their choice. Their choice needs to be respected. But the vast majority of people who do not wish to observe this should have the right not to observe it. So women who don't wish to wear the hijab shouldn't have to wear the hijab. But what has happened now is that the regime itself radicalized the situation by killing and murdering this woman, right? This created a social explosion, so the hijab is off, and we have had, today is actually the 20th day, we're now entering the 21st day of the national protests in Iran, or this Iranian revolution. And women have burnt their hijab right and left. Women are walking the streets of Iran without the hijab on. School children, schoolgirls are going to school without their hijab. Their teachers, some of their teachers are encouraging them. Videos of this can be found all over the internet. People are sending videos, even though the internet is supposedly officially shut down in Iran at the moment. People are still managing to get their footage out there showing that there has been a mass defiance of the imposed hijab, of this mandatory hijab that this regime has put on people since Khomeini came back to Iran, and there is no going back. So as some have said, if the hijab in Iran under the Islamic Republic represented a proverbial Berlin Wall, once this Berlin Wall falls, which has now fallen, because the majority of the Iranian women are refusing, to comply with the mandatory hijab, then this means the end of the Islamic Republic. Period. Because it was just a month after Khomeini came back from France, after the revolution, he succeeded in toppling the Shah's regime, after they had executed all these military officers. Immediately the issue of hijab came up, and immediately these Hezbollahis or the people following Khomeini's line began to impose their will on this issue of hijab on Iranian women. So there was a series of demonstrations by women all throughout Tehran and other cities against mandatory hijab. There were even some clerics, for example, the late Ayatollah Talaqani, who was a sort of ideological rival to the Ayatollah Khomeini, and some believe was even murdered by the Ayatollah Khomeini in September of 1979. He actually went on record saying that we don't wish to impose mandatory veiling, but we wish to give people the choice of whether they want to wear the veil or not, and that he said that in Islam, the issue of veiling is a choice. It is not a mandatory issue. But Khomeini was an Islamist, and he was he came from an extremely rigid interpretation of these issues, not to mention that he was trying to impose an ideological state on Iran, worse than what had preceded him. And so the issue of hijab and the issue of imposing the Islamic Republic with him as the supreme leader were tied together in a knot. So if he had given way, or if he had given any leeway on the issue of hijab, all the other agendas that he had for Iran would have also fallen by the wayside. This is why once the issue of hijab is gone, once that defiance becomes a mass issue, as it has it now in Iran, then the Islamic Republic and its legitimacy is basically gone. And so what we're witnessing now are a revolutionary stage where the regime has completely lost all of its legitimacy. No one believes a single thing it says anymore. I mean, the other day, after 16 days of silence, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the so-called supreme leader, came out, gave a speech, basically reiterating and repeating the very same lines and talking points that he has said every time, blaming the victim and gaslighting the Iranian people over this issue, without addressing the brutality of the system itself, the fact that it was the moral police, the Gasht Ershad, that were responsible for killing that woman. The fact that during the protest that it has been the security forces that have brutalized people, um, killing even more women on the streets, more youngsters on the street, and the fact that this regime has been acting and behaving this way from the very first day it came to Iran, despite all the promises that they gave, all the promises that the Ayatollah Khomeini gave from Paris. They have lied, consistently lied. Moreover, this is not, I mean, certain of my comrades back in Iran, because of the brutality of this regime and the deceitfulness of this regime, and the totalitarian nation of this regime, it has become very common to blame Islam as a whole, right?
Mm.
And the fact of the matter is that if you investigate Khomeini's project very closely, it will become very apparent quickly that what Khomeini did was unprecedented, and that by the definitions of Islamic jurisprudence itself, it's a form of bid'ah. Because the guardianship of the jurisprudence, from the point of view of Shiite law, is basically usurping the rights of the Imam of the time. So, and this is one of the reasons why in Iran, Khomeini was called the Imam, which in a Shiite context is actually not something that ought to be done. I mean, in the Sunni context, it's no problem because Imam is this person who leads leads in the mosque. But to call a revolutionary leader an Imam is basically to accede that he is one of the masums, one of the infallibles. And no one ever questioned this on a popular level. Most of the ulama, most of the clergy in the mosques or in the seminaries seem to have been silenced not to question this, but this was a form of bid'ah. So Khomeini basically constructed an ideology. This was an ideologized form of Islam, with Islam itself being a kind of almost a window dressing rather than the real thing. Because when you look into the very ideology of the Vilayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurisprudence, and how this has been characterized and delineated within the Iranian constitution, the notion of the Vilayat al-Mutlaqiyya Faqih, the absolute guardianship of the jurisprudence, shows what kind of a heresy this is. Because under the notion of the Vilayat al-Mutlaqiyya Faqih, the absolute guardianship of the jurisprudence, the jurisprudent, the ruler, right, the rahbar, can even at any time he has the right to promise something and take this promise back.
Mm.
He has the right to even defy very clear Quranic precepts. He can violate the Sharia. He can then even command new edicts, whether based on the Sharia or not. So in essence, what the concept of the Vilayat al-Faqih is doing on a state level is basically claiming that these individuals that are occupying their street are divine and are on the same level as the prophets and messengers and could issue a ruling, break that ruling, make a promise, break that promise, which is part of the whole nuzul and mansukh, the whole reality that we have in the Quran itself, where at certain points, for instance, in Mecca, the Prophet revealed one thing, a ruling, and then once they were in Medina, these were abrogated. Like the issue of the Qibla in Islam initially is a good point, where initially the Qibla in Islam was Jerusalem, and then after a certain period of time, the Prophet changed direction of the Qibla from Jerusalem to Mecca, right? But these were exigent circumstances. But under the philosophy of the Vilayat al-Faqih, the guardianship of the jurisprudent guardian has the right to do this. Exactly the same thing in his own context, in anything. So he can make a ruling, he can break a ruling. Life and the issue of life and death is completely in his hands. And once we come to the era of Ali Khamenei, the second ruler of the Islamic Republic after Ayatollah Khomeini, then what we began to witness was a complete concentration of power on every level. So every organ of state, from law enforcement to the judiciary, to even the legislative branch of the Iranian Majlis, is completely under the thumb of the jurisprudent guardian. So this is, in essence, an Islamicized form of an absolute monarchy. The very
Mm-hmm.
thing that the Iranian people in 1978 and 1979 arose to overthrow. The mullahs reestablished it, but rather than the crown, they replaced the crown for the turban. It's exactly the same thing. But what this is even more dangerous than absolute monarchy because it is claiming a complete divine mandate without proving this and trying to create not even it's not even trying to create the early society of the Muslims in Mecca and Medina. It's trying to create something else. And it's claiming to be the government of the Mahdi while being simultaneously extremely ambiguous about the actual identity of the Mahdi. And this is where a lot of controversy has arisen as to whether these individuals occupying the chair of the Velayat al-Faqih in Iran, the jurisprudent guardian, are themselves actually claiming that position. This has always been a very ambiguous point of contention amongst the detractors of the IRA, amongst the seminary itself. Was Khomeini claiming to be the Mahdi? Is Ayatollah Ali Khamenei today claiming to be the same thing? And if that's the case, from the point of view of Shiite political theory, these people are claiming absolute infallibility. Totally. I mean, in other words, they're claiming to be God men.
Yes.
And this is a form, this is shirk in every conceivable way. Now, even in the Sufi orders, in the context of suluk, for example, a pir or a murshid in the context of wayfaring and the management of his singular murid or murids should have that kind of should be obeyed. However, on some very basics, a murshid will not infringe on the moral and sacerdotal limits that exist, which is what these people are doing. A murshid will not kill his own murid, right? Which is what Khomeini has done. Countless individuals who followed him initially, who then, once they realized the kind of dictatorship that he was trying to establish in Iran, turned against them and he had these people murdered. And on it goes. So this Vilayat system of the Vilayat al-Faqih in its Iranian context is in essence the system of the Dajjal. And these
Yes.
people are the representatives of the Shaitan itself. And what they have done in Iran and the world for the last 43 years is unconscionable. I mean, we will realize the extent of the damage that was done to Iran and to that region after these people, inshallah, are thrown out on their ears very soon. They impoverished the Iranian nation. Their whole focus became in wanting to export this so-called revolution of theirs, this Islamic revolution of theirs, beyond the borders. That means that they were not prepared anymore to respond to the needs of their own people, so that all the revenue and all the money that they got became basically their piggy bank to finance movements, groups, etc., throughout the region and the world, right? And so, despite the fact that the West itself is guilty of countless things, but when they call Iran a state sponsor of terrorism, they're not. This is not a joke. It is. And it became that way almost immediately after Khomeini took power. This incessant sponsoring groups like, for example, the Hezbollah of Lebanon, various groups in Pakistan, and not all of them are Shiite. This on again, off again dalliance of the regime with the various Takfiri groups in Afghanistan.
Yep.
For example, one of the major figures of the Afghan Mujahideen, who was the most fundamentalist and insane figure of that entire group of people, was Gulbuddin Hekmatyar. Gulbuddin Hekmatyar was the proto-ISIS. He was the proto-Taliban. And he, during the entire course of that war, that Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, the war against the Soviet occupation by the Afghan Mujahideen, was living in Iran and was based out of Iran. And later on, it turned out that this man was CIA as well. And obviously, the regime of the Ayatollahs knew this well enough, but they didn't care. Initially, the regime in Iran was against the Taliban. Then, once the Taliban fell afoul and were overthrown after 9/11, all of a sudden, the regime in Iran is buddy-buddy with Taliban. The same Taliban that was persecuting the Shia Hazara, the
Yes.
Afghan Shiites, right? So, the cynical nature of this regime and its alliances and its, with groups and individuals who are criminals by any definition is 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 beyond reproach. In the meantime, um, initially during the early years of the revolution, while Khomeini was talking the talk of Irfan and kind of it looked like he was at least willing to concede some kind of existence for the Sufi orders. It didn't take very long for that to end. So they went after all of the Sufi orders except one, in particular, which was the Gunawardis. Um, but eventually, even the Gunawadi Sufi order fell afoul of the regime, and right now they have been the most outspoken critics of the IRI. Um, you know, it's war against the Kurds. From the very first day that Khomeini set foot in Iran, even though the Shah's regime also had its problems with the Kurds, but with the mullahs and with these ayatollahs, the problem with the Kurds, it was totally exacerbated. And that was because the regime exacerbated it from day dot when they came back to Iran. They incited these people. They not only did not respond to their needs, but were out to stamp them out at every conceivable opportunity. And when you push the peoples back against the wall, it doesn't matter who it is. They will eventually fight back. And the Kurds are not a people that are to be pushed around, and they shouldn't be pushed around. You know, as far as I'm concerned, the Kurdish people are the original Iranians. They're much more pure in their Iranianness than most of the other ethnic Persian and Iranian minorities. Some great figures have come out of the Kurdish people. I want not Salahuddin, but many great Sufis. Even Shahabuddin Sohrawardi was partially Kurdish. So Kurdistan and the Kurdish people are an Iranian people, more Iranian than Iranians. These people need to be respected, their traditions, their language, their food, their very existence and raison d'etre should be respected. Even though the Shah, like I said, had his own problems with these people, once the mullahs came, this problem went from bad to worse. And it is no accident, I think, of providence that this current revolution in Iran should be ignited with the martyrdom of a Kurdish woman.
Mm.
Because these Kurdish people, especially the Kurdish women, have had their back against the wall by these fascists, this malocracy of the IRI, more than any other, more than anybody else. While certain, very noisy minority religious groups, make a lot of noise and fanfare in the Western media about their own plight, the fact is that no one has been as badly brutalized as the Kurds have the last 43 years. No one. Well, I'm confident that this is going far. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we, like I mentioned in that article with Counterpunch, we have literally crossed the Rubicon. There is no going back. There is almost zero chance that this regime will be able to silence the people. And what is very interesting to me is that the predominant sample of the people who are going out of the street are basically 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old children,
Yes.
adolescents, who are far more radicalized than even the generation of the Green movement. And this is what a lot of people of that Green uprising of 2009 are commenting, that these kids are far beyond us in what they're doing, in what they're saying, and the fact and how they're defying this regime. At this point in 2009, basically the vast majority of people who had initially come out protesting the stealing of the 2009 election had gone home. Certain people have been arrested and taken to Evin or whatever, or Kahrizak. But this continues. Um, you know, Officially, we believe that there's over 150, 160 people who have been killed so far, most of them girls. Um, but this continues and it's escalating. With each passing day, this is escalating. Now, this regime is brutal and it will stop at nothing. But the news that is coming from the ground is that the security forces are also being now exhausted, right? Especially because a lot of this is happening in sporadic parts of cities and it's happening all over the Iranian landscape. Um, and some of them, few here and there, are even beginning to join the protesters.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, it is I think, fair to say that this is like unlike anything that we have seen in the last 40 years. And there is no doubt, at least in my mind, that this is going to succeed. That the mullah's regime is going. It is on its way out. We are witnessing history. And that everybody should be a part of this. Even non-Iranians, in my opinion, should be part of this in giving their help, their moral support, or whatever they can to these people, their prayers, you know, for the success of these people. Because I don't believe that this will just stop at Iran, right? This is a wave that is coming over this whole planet
Yes.
that is going to change a lot of things, and it's going to the law of unintended consequences is going to be at play on every level here. And I should mention the following: um, this current revolution in Iran started precisely 19 days after I completed the bayan, after I completed the last chapter, the 19th chapter or the 19th unity of the bayan on the 26th of August. Mahsaamini was arrested on the 13th of September, which triggered what is going on. I look at these signs. These are the signs, that are coming from above. The fact that woman is at the centerpiece of this is also another indication to me that her hand is in this.
Yes.
Her hand is moving. She is moving this. And that Mahsa Amini at that very moment was the face of Fatima. She was the watch Allah. She was the face of God. She was the martyr. She was the female Hussein at that very moment. And Yazid and the forces of the Umayyads and the Sufyanis at that moment were the Gashti Arshad, the morality police, the
Mm.
Islamic Republic. Right? Now, most of this pious mob is going to have a real problem with someone talking about a female Hussein. That is what Mahsa Amini is. She's a female Hussein. And
Yeah.
if the pious go every year in Taswa and Ashra and beat their chests about this holy figure that died over 1,000 years ago, this happened today in Iran, in your own country. This woman was Hussein. That woman at that very moment was Hussein and Fatima. It was Fatima and Hussein in body at that very moment. And if these people can get their head around this, they will realize immediately that the regime that they are serving or the regime that they are remaining silent to is the regime of Yazid.
Hmm. That's absolutely right, Sheikh. Because right now, just looking at the Persian people, and if you look at their history, they are a strong and warrior people. If you look at their history, who they are, the trials and tribulations and victories and successes that their rich history has entailed in that land. Myself, coming from a Persian ancestry, I know those people will overcome this latest enemy that's there on their land, and they will overcome these forces. And the new generation of Persian men and women that are growing up, we could compare them to the Generation Z of America, the ones that are not tolerating any kind of abuse from anybody, whether it's workplaces, organizations. These people are connected, they're educated. These are the return of many of those warrior souls that are coming back into the modern man and woman, and I'm happy to see that they're taking their control back. It's and you're right, it's not only in Iran, it's happening in my home country, it's other places. People realize that there was that Western hold over their leaders that were suppressing these people and not giving them their due rights. In Islam, it tells you there is no compulsion in religion.
La
So these
ikraha fi din.
people
Yeah.
these people are acting like gods, and they need to be held accountable, which is shirk and bid'ah. And also the aspect of how Islam teaches you to love and respect and honor your woman. Heaven lies at the feet of your mother.
Yeah.
And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, out of all of the 99 names, you can call me Allah or you can call me Rahman, which is a feminine name. So the Divine Mother is bringing divine retribution in Iran, in Pakistan, in other Muslim countries which had these Western backed puppets and leaders that suppressed their people, while their families and their grandkids were living lavish lifestyles in France and England and America. And now that karma is all coming back because the mother, in her all seeing, all knowing nature, she knows. She knows, and she will hold all of these shayateen accountable who
One
have
by one.
suppressed the Persian people. And for all of our brothers and sisters that are listening in Iran or wherever you might be watching or listening to this from, Please take heed to what Sheikh Wahid Azal is telling you and take the control back of your country. You are the Persian people, the warriors that people know in their history, and fight back against these devils and take your history and your country back.
Absolutely, take your country back, which is actually a line in this wonderful song that was written for this event called Surud Zan. I will link that in the description. It's such a beautiful tune. This is what is happening, and this is, like I said, this is going to go beyond the borders of Iran. This is the hand of the mother herself, the
Yeah.
goddess, the true living Godhead, who is female. Behind this, every woman in the streets of Iran who has pulled her hijab up is the face of God. She is the
Yeah.
divine face projecting in every single one of these women against this patriarchal shaitan, which is the system. And what these people in power don't realize is that they are today what the Quraysh, what the pagan idol worshippers of Mecca were, that the Muslims were struggling against in the early part. They are the
Mhm.
idolaters. They are the idol worshippers. They have made an idol, a taghut, you know, out of their system of the vilayat al-faqih and their supreme leader. They are committing shirk. These people are mushrikeen, right? They are complete infidels from any definition that you want. So they should not in remotely be supported. And the thing is that God does not require a government. The,
Yes.
the creator of all things has established the government of nature over the whole of existence. It has, what need does it have of human politics, to represent it? It has no need for that. So the best form of government that we have, at least in theory, is democracy.
Mm.
Where ideology and the actual day-to-day administration of government are separate things. If what possible relevance does a belief in anything have to, for example, your trash collection or your road building or your, basic bureaucratic things that happen on a day-to-day basis? They have nothing to do with that, right?
Mm.
They what they're contingent on is technology and know-how. People should believe, but belief should never be imposed. When you impose something, and especially if it's morality, you create the very opposite dynamic to that very thing. And this is what happened in Iran. People forced the hijab on the women of Iran. 43 years later, they're now burning the hijab and burning their faces and calling death to your regime. This is the legacy of the Ayatollah Khomeini. So the Ayatollah Khomeini has failed. He was an abject failure because the man was a monster and a liar, and he
Yes.
and he lied to the Iranian people, and because the Iranian people were so giddy to attain that freedom that had been denied them by the Shah's regime that they had fought for at the turn of the last century, at the turn of the 20th century in the constitutional revolution, and because that previous regime had eliminated all viable opposition to itself other than the mullahs, they believed this man. And Khomeini played his part very well, despite the fact that there were many that were sounding alarm bells, even in the early stages of the revolution of 1979. But he proved to the world, he proved to the Iranian people that this man was a wolf, and in a very transparent sheet clothing as well. So now, 43 years later, after all the damage that was done, after all the innocent blood that was shed, all the brutalization, war, destruction, it is now time for change. And like I said, it is not going to stop in Iran. The creator of the universe, the creatrix of this universe, has an agenda, and this is going to go beyond Iran. This is going to basically discredit Islamism, number one, as first order of business, but then it will also go to the West.
Yes.
Because when we are talking about these three things, woman, zan,
Mm-hmm.
zendegi, life, azadi, freedom, these are three things that are actually attributes of the goddess, of the feminine goddess, of Fatima, or whatever name you want to call her. Life is an attribute of the female, the female attribute, divine attribute. So that means that this system of capitalism that is destroying the environment of this planet is now also going to be progressively under the microscope. And in Iran, these mullahs destroyed the environment over the last 40 years. So, the issue of environmental destruction is one of the things that any future system in Iran is going to have to address, because they, over the last 40 years, certain parts of Iran have become completely parched. Areas of Iran that used to be agrarian breadbaskets, like, for example, the area around Lake Urumiyeh. Lake Urumiyeh is now completely dry. There's not a drop of water. This was a lake that has existed for thousands of years. And under the misplaced policies of these people, where they built these dams in areas of Iran where they shouldn't have, and basically redirected natural water streams into these man-made dams, they have completely parched these areas of Iran that were lush and verdant for thousands and thousands of years.
Mm.
Much of the wildlife that was already beginning to disappear during the period of the Shah, some of this stuff has just completely disappeared now. So, for the catch call of this revolution to be Zan, woman, Zendegi, life, is extremely important, even beyond the obvious, because this has a environmental undertone, because it is about the life of the female, which is the mother nature, and the
Yes.
azadi, the freedom of this mother nature, to create that ecological equilibrium, and that this system, whether in Iran or under the neoliberal capitalist juggernaut, has been bent on destroying. So it is going to start washing away that system as well. It's not. I mean, Iran is the start. This is going to go way beyond Iran. Going to go way beyond Iran. People are seeing this already. Um, but at the same time, we're seeing a deceptive fascist regime like that of Vladimir Putin launch this aggressive war against the Ukrainian people. It
Yes.
itself is on its last leg. They have been thoroughly defeated by the Ukrainians, um, and to the point that Mr. Vladimir Putin is now saber rattling, threatening a nuclear showdown with the West. I don't believe that this is going to happen. I think this is a bluff. I think we have seen enough, and even the Russian establishment has seen enough. I think that Mr. Vladimir Putin himself is going to be overthrown pretty shortly, either in an internal coup d'etat, or these soldiers that he's just basically drafted, calling this partial mobilization, are going to turn around and come to Moscow and come to the Kremlin like they did back in 1917 when they overthrew the Tsar. So,
It's interesting, Sheikh. You mentioned that because recently I was watching the news reports, and the people of Russia have come out who have been crushed by these sanctions because of Putin's criminal behavior, and they're saying we have to throw Putin to the trenches. So what's going on? What started in Iran has now ignited a fire all over the world, where people are just coming out onto the streets and they're telling their people enough is enough. We're suffering with inflation, with crime. There's no resources for our children. We have to make a better world for them. And they're tired of these criminal leaders and their policies. So the Mother Goddess has ignited this divine retribution globally.
yes, she has, and she won't stop, and until she gets that revenge in full. So
Yeah.
these fools who think that they can stop this, they can't stop this. They're going to be swept away by this. She's going to cut
Mm.
their heads off, just like in that effigy of Kali. She's going to cut their heads off. The mother is out for blood, and she's going to have her. She's going to be satisfied,
Yeah.
whatever you people think. You know, and this is for a just cause. This is for to reset a balance that has been out of whack for a very very long time.
Mm.
Um, so people need to take heed, and those people in the street, those women and men in the streets of Iran today, or even in Russia, who are defying their rulers, are actually the face of God. They are the power of God. In my philosophy, God works on the ground
Yes.
with the people on the ground, with the meek. When Jesus says that the meek shall inherit the earth, the meek shall inherit the earth, because God is always on the side of the meek.
Yeah.
So all this rhetoric that these people have been spouting, these mullahs, they're talking about the mustakbirin, the arrogant, and the mustazafin, the wretched of the earth. They themselves are the mustakbirin. They are the arrogant. And it is their people who are the mustazafin, defying them right now. and they are that is the God force that is in the streets of Iran or in the streets of Russia, defying its rulers, and also the women. Let's give credit where credit is due to these women in the United States that have been defying this ridiculous ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States that overturned Roe versus Wade, that is
Yes.
attempting to impose a Christian theocracy through law, through a legal coup d'état on the American people. Um, that also, the pushback against that is also God.
Well, that's going to happen, Sheikh, because even here in America, you have so many women's issues, and if you just Google women's crimes in America and women's issues in America, you're going to find an astronomical data. And most people here do not realize the United States of America is not a Christian country. If you look at the founding fathers and their Masonic background and what they envisioned this country to be, it has Masonic values, which is to have everyone have equality in status and have everyone equal as brothers and sisters of the land. And those that say, okay, these organizations or this country is 100% Judeo Christian and they want to impose their theocracy or the Puritan ways or the stuff that they were doing in the Salem witch trials, they are sorely mistaken because even here, the Generation Z, the men and women that are growing up now, they're not tolerating the lies that they're finding in their education system, the abuse that's being taking place in the workplaces, and even something recently happened called mass resignations, where anywhere where there was abuse or any kind of injustice taking place, these young kids they took action. So the next generation that's coming, Sheikh, whether it's in Russia protesting against Putin, in Iran against the Ayatollahs, here against these Christian extremists who want to impose their views here, it's all going to collectively come together as all of the divine form of the goddess mother who's working through all of these beings to bring these tyrants to the ground.
And it's happening. We're watching it unfold right now. And on the spiritual front, I am most honored by her to have been part of this process, to be part of that force that pushed the ignition switch on this. And I think that we will start to witness a different world over the next 10 to 15, 20 years.
Yes,
Inshallah, I will live to see at least the beginning of this. If not, my daughter will be here. And it is, for her generation and the generations after her that, all of this is going to unfold and they're going to be the beneficiaries of it. But this is, in a sense, a very good thing. And, you know, I'm happy that this has come. I asked for a sign after I finished writing the bayan on that 26th of August, to give me a sign, you know. And what is happening in Iran is something that deep down every Iranian in exile has been hoping and wishing for all of these 40 plus years. And this is what
yes,
she gave. The one thing that we have all been, really wishing and hoping for all this time is now coming to pass. This was my sign that this is now unfolding. And particularly because in the bayan, I called for, very explicitly, that the system of patriarchy has to be overthrown, and that
yes,
at least even if it is for an interim period, a certain period of time, that the women of this planet need to take power over the men, and the men have to then support this matriarchal power structure. And we're witnessing this very thing unfold in Iran right now. It is the women at the forefront, and it's the men who are basically acting as the shield of the women empowered who are leading this revolution for the toppling of patriarchy. This is straight
hmm
out of the pages of what I wrote in that, especially in the 15th unity of the Bayan, the first gate of the 15th unity of the Bayan. I wrote this, and now it is transpiring in Iran.
absolutely, Sheikh, and it's absolutely beautiful to live in this time frame. And I always thought that the period that we're in, the 2020s, from 2020 through 2029, going into 2030s, we are going to see the world change as we know it, and it's changing right in front of us. And now with the divine justice that's taking place, and a great sheikh like yourself, who's part of this manifestation, who helped to manifest what's taking place in this realm, because a lot of the teachers and guides that come in our lives are the lights that are holding this world together. You have been that light for not only me but for countless others, and your work, with your hard work you have done with the bayan and other things which have now come into manifestation, and And it's such an honor and a privilege to see something like this taking place in our lifetime. And I believe these tyrants all over the world, Sheikh, no matter what country or tribe that they're in, they have to start counting their days now, because the next generation, especially the Persian people, they are a warrior people. And I know they're going to take back control from these criminals that have taken their land hostage and taken their resources and their culture and who they really are. And as time goes on, like you said, in your daughter's generation and the ones after them, they will see the fruits of our labors and the fruits of those that have struggled hard against this regime. And for the Iranian people that are listening, please take heed to what Sheikh Wahid Azal is instructing you, that you keep pressing on in this fight.
And inshallah, maybe in the next year or so, Salman and I can be in Iran together because I'd like to show you around the motherland.
Oh yeah, of course, of course. I mean, through my mother's side, I have Iranian Persian ancestry, because at that time, if you go back into history, before the colonists made the modern day maps, Iran and Pakistan, it all used to be part of the original Persian
Yes,
Empire.
they were. Yeah.
So, inshallah, in the future, as time goes on, I would love to go to Iran, see where the Alamut is, where the Hashashin were, where the Shiraz is, and see all of the great Sufi teachings and saints. And of course, with my murshid, inshallah, I hope to do that next year.
Inshallah. Inshallah. It will happen. So let's leave it here because I think we've pretty much covered what we needed to cover. And all power to the people of Iran.
Definitely. And for those that are listening, the Counterpunch article that Sheikh Wahid has recently published, I will put that in the description below, including the links for all of his channels and everything else that he is doing. So thank you all, and Nur alaikum until next time for part 19. Thank you.
Ya Nur.